A cold, early winter morning, the wind howled through the cracks of the gray city walls. The subway in downtown New York was already packed with people. Hurrying footsteps, silent faces, and faint breaths in the cold mist painted a lonely picture of modern life. At that moment, as the clock struck 7:15, an elderly man slowly stepped toward the edge of the platform. The dim yellow light from the station ceiling cast down, unable to erase the pallor from his face. His silver hair swayed gently in the breeze, and his worn-out coat draped over him like a thin layer of fragile memories, stained with the marks of time. His legs trembled with each step, as if using all his strength to resist the early winter chills seeping through every draft. He was Richard, 78 years old, living alone in an old apartment in the southern part of the city. No one knew why he was at the station at this hour, in the silent cold of the morning, like a forgotten memory lost in the rush of the modern world. The piercing screech of the subway echoed through the misty air. As the train halted, its sliding doors creaked open, releasing a wave of bone-chilling cold into the space. Amidst the crowd jostling to get on, Richard quietly stepped into the carriage. He grasped the doorframe lightly, swayed slightly, then steadied himself, moving forward with the careful steps of someone who could no longer afford to fall. Inside the train, the atmosphere was crowded and stifling. Most of the seats were occupied. Each passenger was lost in their own world, some engrossed in their phones, others with headphones on, immersed in music. A few closing their eyes, trying to steal a few more moments of sleep. No one looked up. No one saw him. No one wanted to see him. In the far left corner of the carriage, two young students sat next to each other. Victor, 20 years old, tall, well-dressed, with neatly styled hair. Beside him was Emma, a petite girl with bright eyes but a weary expression after a long night of studying. Both were first-year students at a prestigious university on their way to a final exam, one that could determine their scholarship for the entire year. Victor glanced at the elderly man trembling before him. His gaze lingered for a second before he quickly turned away, leaning against the window and shutting his eyes. No expression, no movement. He pretended to sleep as if he had rehearsed it before. Emma, on the other hand, hesitated. Her hand clenched the strap of her bag. She looked at the old man, then at Victor, then down at the train floor, as if struggling with something inside her. The train shook with every turn, nearly causing Richard to collapse. Finally, Emma took a deep breath and stood up. She gently offered her seat to him. Richard turned, looking dazed as if he couldn't believe his ears. After a moment, he slowly nodded, his lips moving but forming no words. He sat down, his frail hands resting on his knees, staring blankly ahead as if holding back an old memory. Emma stood for the rest of the ride, gripping the overhead rail. Victor kept pretending to sleep, but he couldn't hide the way he secretly glanced over. He knew exactly what had just happened and knew that, in a brief moment, he had chosen selfishness. But he also knew that today's exam was everything, the key to his future, everything he had worked for. Emma, however, had chosen differently. She had sacrificed that for a stranger. The train stopped at Coney Island's Stillwell Avenue. Richard slowly got up, looking around in confusion. Emma noticed and stepped forward, asking if he needed help. After a short conversation, she realized that he didn't quite remember his way home. His memory flickered in and out. He could only say he was looking for a certain street but couldn't recall its name, only mentioning an old bookstore on the corner with a large oak tree in front. Emma frowned. It was almost time for her exam. If she got off the train now, she wouldn't make it to school in time. But if she left the old man alone, she wouldn't be able to rest easy. She had seen too many news stories about elderly people getting lost, accidents in the freezing winter, and the helplessness in his eyes made it impossible for her to turn away. She asked him to wait a moment, quickly pulling out her phone to text her professor, notifying them she'd be late. But the reply was automated. Students arriving more than 5 minutes late will not be allowed into the exam room. She bit her lip, glancing at the time. 8:12 a.m., 18 minutes left. If she left now, she might make it. But if he wandered off again, what would happen to him? Taking a deep breath, she finally made her decision. She told Richard she would take him home. He looked at her, repeating the same vague question. "Are you a nurse?" Emma smiled, simply nodded, and gently took his frail arm, guiding him off the train. Inside the train, Victor opened his eyes and saw Emma stepping off with the old man. He frowned but said nothing. He knew she was going to miss the exam, but in his mind a thought lingered. She's just making trouble for herself. What kind of kindness is this? Outside the station, the cold wind rushed up from the underground. Emma wrapped her scarf around the old man's neck, asked him for more details, and walked with him through the streets. She opened the map on her phone, tracing every clue he mentioned. An old bookstore, a large oak tree, a red brick wall. It felt like a treasure hunt, except the player couldn't remember the map. It took over an hour after asking many passers-by before Emma finally found the street where Richard lived. It was an old apartment complex beside a small park. The oak tree was still there, its branches bare in the winter. A wooden wind chime hung at the entrance, swaying gently. Emma helped the old man up the stairs, opened the door, and switched on the light in his small room. The room was simple, with few belongings, but everything was neatly arranged. On the table sat an old picture frame. Inside, a younger Richard stood beside a little boy. The house was so quiet that the ticking of the wall clock felt almost loud. Richard sat down in his chair and smiled at the young girl, as if wanting to say thank you, but his voice was hoarse. Emma made him a cup of hot tea, placed it on the table, then bowed slightly and prepared to leave. She didn't leave her name, nor her phone number, just a small note that read, "Wishing you good health." As she stepped out of the building, her phone buzzed relentlessly. It was a notification from the university. She had officially missed the exam. No chance for a retake. A 0 for an important course meant losing her full scholarship. And without the scholarship, she couldn't continue school. Her family couldn't afford it. Her father had passed away early. Her mother worked as a housekeeper and had a heart condition. The weight of everything now rested entirely on Emma's shoulders. She sat down on the freezing steps, her hands trembling as she opened each message. Her heart felt like it was being crushed. But she didn't cry. She just sighed, long and deep. She could have chosen indifference, just like everyone else. She could have closed her eyes, pretended to sleep. But she had chosen to stand up, to give up something important for a stranger. Would anyone ever know about that choice? Would anyone ever appreciate it? That evening, she called her mother, her voice unsteady as she said she would be dropping out of school. Her mother was silent for a long time. Then she simply said, "I believe in you, no matter what you choose. I believe in you." In the darkness of the city, a small light still flickered inside Emma's tiny rented room. She curled up on her bed, holding a book she never got the chance to read. Her dream of university had shattered, like a dandelion carried away by the wind. But somewhere deep inside her, there was still a faint warmth, perhaps from the look in Richard's eyes, or the quiet reassurance of knowing she had done the right thing. 2 weeks had passed since Emma left college, giving up her place for a stranger and losing her future in the process. She had packed up and left the dormitory, making space for someone else. Now she lived in a tiny room, barely 10 square meters near Chinatown. The walls were damp and peeling. The air carried a faint, musty smell at night. But Emma never complained. She had seen worse growing up. What weighed on her more than the living conditions was her mother's eyes during their last video call. Eyes filled with sadness, but also unshaken resilience, as if wanting to embrace her daughter through the screen. Without a degree, Emma took on even more part-time jobs. She found work bussing tables at April Diner, a small Italian family-owned restaurant. She worked from 5 a.m. to 4 p.m., then delivered food by bicycle in the evenings. Every day ended with aching feet and a sore back, but she forced herself to smile. She saved every dollar carefully, piece by piece. Enough for rent, enough to send money home for her mother's medication, and sometimes just enough to buy a small bouquet of white chrysanthemums for her table, to remind herself she was still here. Life moved on that way for nearly 5 years. No one ever mentioned that fateful train ride again. Richard faded from her memory like a passing stranger. Sometimes Emma wondered if he was still alive, or if he had passed away, alone in a silent room somewhere in this cold city. But then she shook her head. Kindness doesn't need recognition. It only needs to remain pure. One rainy spring afternoon, while Emma was wiping down the last table near the window, the diner door swung open. A tall man entered, dressed sharply in a black shirt, dark trousers, and a long coat. His black hair was slightly damp from the rain, and his deep eyes scanned the room, as if searching for something. Raindrops still clung to his shoulders. He hesitated at the entrance for a few seconds, as if debating something important. Emma barely glanced at the man, intending to greet him as she would any other customer. But his gaze lingered on her in an unusual way. It wasn't the look of a typical diner. It was focused, almost emotional. He walked up to the counter, ordered a black coffee, and quietly sat down at the table she had just wiped clean. A moment later, he spoke, his voice calm but deliberate. "Are you Emma?" She froze, turning to face him with a puzzled expression. She couldn't remember ever meeting this man before. His face felt oddly familiar, but she couldn't place why. After a pause, she nodded slowly. "I'm Keanu Reeves." The name echoed in the small space like an unexpected ripple. She couldn't believe her ears. Keanu Reeves? The world-famous actor? But how did he know her name? Before she could process her thoughts, he pulled a worn leather notebook from his coat pocket. Its edges were frayed with time. He placed it on the table and gently opened it. The pages inside were yellowed, the ink slightly smudged, but the handwriting, shaky yet careful, chronicled each entry with precision. Keanu turned to one of the last pages and slid the notebook toward her. There, written in delicate, wavering letters, was a short passage. "A young girl stood up and gave her seat to me, a confused old man whom no one cared for. No one noticed, but in that moment, I felt alive again. She even walked me home. I can't remember everything, but I remember her eyes, clear and kind, like the morning sun." "Emma, is that your name?" Emma sat motionless. Her fingers trembled as she touched the page. It was Richard's handwriting, the old man from that day. Keanu explained that his father, Richard, had passed away nearly a year ago due to complications from Alzheimer's. But before he died, he left behind this notebook. During his final days, when his memory was slipping in and out, the one thing that remained vivid was Emma. He spoke of her often, saying he wished he could meet her one last time to thank her properly. Keanu had read the journal, pieced things together, traced the old subway station's security footage, cross-checked university records of students who had failed the exam that year, and eventually he found her. His eyes, warm yet solemn, met hers. "My father said that if it weren't for you that day, he might have been lost in the snow, or worse. But you brought him home, made him tea, and left without expecting anything. I've been searching for you, not for recognition, but out of gratitude. And because," he hesitated briefly before continuing, "I think it's time I do something right on his behalf." Emma didn't know how to react. Everything felt too sudden. She had never imagined that a small act, just standing up on a train, would create an invisible thread that connected two strangers across time. But what touched her most was the fact that Richard never forgot her, even when his mind was fading away. Keanu sat quietly for a moment before speaking again. "I own a hospitality group, hotels, restaurants. I want to offer you a job, starting from the ground up. Not out of pity, but because I believe you deserve it. Your kindness changed a person's life, and I believe it can change a future as well." Emma was speechless. For years, she had kept her head down, never asking for anything, never expecting life to give her back what it took away. And now fate was opening a door, one she thought had been permanently shut. That night, Emma walked for hours in the misty rain. She thought about her mother, their tiny apartment, the times she had nearly lost her job because she had to take her mom to the hospital. And now here was an opportunity from someone she never expected to cross paths with. Not just a job, but a way back to the dream she had buried for 5 long years. The next day, she met Keanu. Her face still held traces of disbelief, but her eyes were brighter. She told him that if he was offering her a chance, she would take it, with both hands. Keanu gave her a small smile and simply said, "This is just the beginning." Emma had no idea that stepping through the glass doors of Horizon Collection, Keanu's hospitality empire, would mark the start of a completely new chapter in her life. Everything felt surreal, both foreign and familiar. 4 days after their conversation, she received an official email. She had been formally accepted as a trainee at Horizon Haven, one of the most prestigious branches of the company. But what she didn't expect was the attachment in the email, a PDF file. She opened it, her eyes skimming the first line before freezing in shock. Full scholarship award, Emma, bachelor's degree in hospitality management, 4-year program. The words were unmistakable. At the bottom, an electronic signature, Keanu Reeves. Her chest tightened. She placed a hand over her heart, feeling its steady rhythm slow, as if pausing at the peak of a crescendo. That afternoon, Emma arrived at the address included in the email, a small apartment building just 2 blocks away from the restaurant. The receptionist handed her a key, smiling warmly as she said that Keanu had covered the rent for the first 5 years, and she could move in immediately. The apartment was on the 7th floor, door 701. She stepped inside, moving carefully, as if afraid of disturbing the untouched stillness of the space. Inside, soft light filled the room. Light oak flooring, a single cream-colored sofa, a compact but well-equipped kitchen, and a large glass window overlooking the city streets. In the bedroom, a neatly made bed with crisp white sheets awaited her. On the desk, a bouquet of white chrysanthemums and a small note read, "Welcome to the beginning of a new journey." K double quote. Emma stood there, unmoving, for what felt like minutes. She had never lived in a place like this. No damp walls, no scurrying cockroaches in the night, no lingering smells of food from the neighboring rooms. Everything was so peaceful that it felt almost foreign, like she had wandered into a world not meant for her. But when she saw her name on the scholarship letter, she knew there was no reason to turn this down. She had walked too long in darkness. Now it was time to step into the light. Even if that light was so bright, it left her momentarily blinded. 3 days later, Emma started work at Horizon Haven, a 5-star restaurant housed within the luxury hotel of the same name. Her schedule was packed from morning to night, hotel management classes in the morning, restaurant work in the afternoon, online coursework in the evening. Some nights, she only managed 4 hours of sleep, but she never once complained. Every morning, she made herself a cup of black coffee, looked out the window, and reminded herself, this is the reward for years of perseverance. Some days when the rain slammed against the glass, it reminded her of cycling through blizzards to deliver food. But this time she smiled, because this time she was living a life with a future. In this new world, she didn't just learn how to serve guests. She learned how to manage people, operate business systems, calculate costs, and handle high-pressure situations with grace. She learned from everyone, both colleagues and customers. But most importantly, she learned how to believe in herself again. The first few weeks flew by in a blur of relentless effort. Emma was always the first to arrive and the last to leave. She trained herself to notice every detail, the habits of returning customers, the precise placement of cutlery in fine dining, even how to fold napkins into elegant designs. She focused so intensely on improving that she didn't realize she was becoming an irreplaceable part of the team. At the end of the month, as she was packing up after a late shift, she received a message from Keanu. "Come to my office on the 10th floor tomorrow. There's something I want to discuss." She felt anxious all night. She had no idea that this meeting would completely shift the life she had just begun to stabilize. The next morning, she stepped into Keanu's office. He stood by the window, holding a cup of hot tea, his back slightly hunched in thought. When he turned and saw her, he nodded and gestured for her to sit. "I know you're working incredibly hard," he began, his voice calm and measured. "I've been keeping track of your progress, both in training and at the restaurant. You've exceeded expectations." Emma lowered her gaze and replied softly, "I'm just trying to prove myself worthy of the opportunity you gave me." Keanu smiled, set down his cup, and continued, "I want you to know that this journey won't be easy. There will be times you'll feel exhausted, times you'll want to give up. But you've already made it through darker days, and I believe you will push through this too." Emma clenched her fists lightly. A warmth spread through her chest. She understood. This wasn't just encouragement. It was a warning for the long road ahead. She stood up, bowed her head in gratitude, and left the office feeling lighter than she had in years. That night, when she returned to her apartment, she opened her laptop and logged into her online learning portal. A new notification appeared. Emma, you have been nominated for the accelerated program, allowing you to complete your degree in 2 years instead of 4, provided you maintain your current performance. She sat still, overwhelmed, her throat tightening. Everything was finally falling into place, and this time, no one could take it away from her. Standing on her apartment balcony, Emma looked down at the city streets. The headlights of passing cars streaked through the night like tiny shooting stars. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew this. Every step she took now was built on trust and kindness. And in those steady steps, fate was already setting the stage, leading her towards someone from her past, someone she never expected to meet again, in a completely different chapter of her life. On Monday morning, Emma put on her freshly pressed uniform and walked toward Horizon Haven with a mix of excitement and nerves. Today was her first official day as a full-time employee after completing her internship. She had been assigned to the third-floor service team, the section reserved for business executives, where the standards were exponentially stricter. Her hands trembled slightly as she pinned on her new name tag. Emma, Service Assistant. A small detail, but one that carried the weight of 3 months of relentless effort. As she entered the morning briefing room, where staff gathered to receive their shift assignments and menu updates, Emma came to an abrupt halt. The man standing at the front by the announcement board was tall, his hair slicked back, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit. His voice was firm, authoritative. It was Victor. He introduced himself to the new employees as if he had never met any of them before. I'm Victor. I look forward to working with you all. Let's maintain professionalism and take our jobs seriously. When his eyes passed over Emma, there was no flicker of recognition, no surprise, no memory, not even a moment of hesitation. Just the same detached glance one would give to a stranger. Emma stood rigid, her spine straight as steel. She had never expected to see Victor again. Victor, the classmate who had sat right next to her on that fateful train ride. Victor, the one who had pretended to sleep, choosing selfishness over kindness. And now he was her direct manager. His presence in this world she had only just started to adapt to felt like a cold wind cutting through her bones. At first, Victor treated her no differently than anyone else. His management style was professional, his instructions clear, and he showed no favoritism or hostility toward any employee, including her. But it was too normal, too indifferent, which made Emma uneasy. Had he truly not recognized her, or was he pretending not to? That question lingered in her mind for weeks. Whenever she received directives from Victor, she kept her expression neutral, avoiding direct eye contact. But there were moments, split seconds, when his gaze would pause on her, hesitating ever so slightly before moving on, as if he was fighting against a memory he didn't want to acknowledge. One late afternoon during peak dinner service, Emma slipped in the kitchen and accidentally knocked over a tray of glasses. Before she could even bend down to pick them up, Victor appeared. His voice was like ice. What kind of work ethic is this? Do you think this is a playground? Go to the locker room. Your shift is over. No concern if she was hurt, no empathy. Silence spread through the kitchen. Emma lowered her head and walked away, her hands trembling as she clenched them together. It wasn't until the next day that she noticed her pinky finger was mildly sprained. From that point on, Victor started assigning her heavier shifts, placing her in the most demanding sections, near the kitchen, where the heat was unbearable and the pressure relentless. She never complained, never protested. But deep down, she understood. Victor knew. He knew exactly who she was. And now he was pushing her to her limits, quietly but deliberately, hoping she would break. It wasn't fate testing her this time. It was a person she once knew. But this time, she refused to let her kindness be mistaken for weakness. Each night she went home, studied, wrapped her injured hand in a bandage, and continued her routine as usual. She told her mother about her strict new manager, but deliberately left out his name. She didn't want her mother to worry, because in Emma's world, there was no room for self-pity. only forward motion. A week later, while reviewing an invoice for a produce shipment, Emma overheard a conversation between two chefs in the back kitchen. One of them whispered, "Did you hear? Victor switched to a new supplier last month. Prices went up, but the quality dropped." The other responded, "Yeah, I've noticed the vegetables have been arriving bruised, but management already signed off on it, so we can't say anything." Emma wasn't an expert investigator, but years of surviving life's challenges had sharpened her instincts. She started quietly documenting invoices, tracking price fluctuations, and comparing the actual quality of the produce being delivered. Patterns emerged. The new supplier's prices were consistently 10 to 15% higher than market rates. Yet the quality of the ingredients was steadily declining. Whenever she tried asking about it, Victor's responses were clipped. "Not your concern. Focus on your own tasks." And it wasn't just the supplier issue. One evening, a VIP guest complained about a dish. Victor immediately adjusted the bill, offered them a premium bottle of wine, and personally apologized with a charming smile. But just 5 minutes later, when an elderly woman mentioned her meal had arrived cold, he dismissively waved for another staff member to handle it, without a second glance. Emma watched closely. The polite smile, the thinly veiled contempt beneath it, the blatant favoritism toward wealth. It was clear now. This wasn't just a professional environment. This was a game of power, and Victor had learned how to play it well. Money could erase mistakes, and the weak were silenced. Emma hesitated between staying silent and speaking up. She remembered Keanu's words. This journey will not be easy. But would he believe her if she exposed Victor? Would she be seen as petty, jealous of a successful manager? One day, she decided to send an anonymous email to the restaurant group's internal audit department. She attached all the invoices she had quietly collected, carefully noting each price discrepancy with specific dates and times. She didn't sign her name, didn't mention Victor, only wrote, "Please review the supplier contracts from this month. There are irregularities." The days that followed were filled with an unsettling silence. Victor continued smiling, giving orders as if nothing had happened. But Emma noticed members of the internal audit team appearing more frequently, questioning different departments, checking inventory more often. She wasn't sure if she had done the right thing, but she knew one thing: silence helps no one. Late one night after her shift, while washing the last glass at the counter, Emma saw Victor approaching. This time, he didn't pretend not to know her. His voice wasn't cold. It was laced with bitterness. "I know it was you. You think sending a few anonymous invoices can bring me down? I've been here for years. You're just a dropout wiping tables, trying to start over." Emma met his gaze directly. She didn't respond. She didn't need to explain herself. For the first time in years, she no longer felt afraid of Victor, because she knew the truth was closing in. Standing in front of the locker room mirror, she looked at herself in her old uniform. Her hands were still calloused from wiping tables, her back still sore after every shift. But her eyes no longer held hesitation. She knew she had done nothing wrong, and this time, the past was no longer a wound. It was part of her journey to prove herself. That morning, the atmosphere at Horizon Haven was strangely suffocating. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered that Victor was being reinstated after the internal review. Others claimed they had seen him entering the senior management office on the 9th floor the day before. Another person muttered that it was all just a misunderstanding, and Keanu was too busy managing other branches to deal with something this trivial. Emma sat silently in the locker room, neatly folding her apron. She said nothing, neither confirming nor denying anything, but deep inside, a cold unease was growing. If Victor truly returned unscathed, if the evidence wasn't enough, then she would be the first one forced out. At exactly 10 a.m., an urgent internal announcement was broadcast. All Horizon Haven staff report to the second floor meeting room. Mandatory attendance at 10:15 a.m. No absences allowed. The formal, dry wording sent a shockwave through the staff. No one knew the reason, but emergency meetings like these were rare. And whenever they happened, something big was about to change. The second floor conference room, usually reserved for high-level strategy meetings, was now packed. More than 30 employees from service, kitchen, Front desk and logistics sat in tense silence. The long meeting table was empty. No documents, no presentation slides, just a palpable tension, as if everyone was awaiting a verdict. Emma sat in the last row, hands clasped tightly together in her lap. At exactly 10:20, the door opened. Victor strode in, calm, collected. Adjusting his tie, he smiled. The smile of a man who had already won. Behind him were the head of HR and a regional oversight officer. Keanu was nowhere to be seen. No one spoke. Victor walked to the center of the room and gave a polite nod. Thank you all for your cooperation over the past few weeks. After a thorough financial review, no serious violations have been found. Some minor discrepancies have been adjusted, and this will not affect my current position. The room froze. A few employees exchanged glances. Some lowered their eyes. Emma lifted her head. A wave of cold disbelief washing over her. No, this can't be how it ends. Victor continued, his eyes drifting towards Emma, amusement flickering beneath his words. I hope moving forward, we can work together with a stronger sense of teamwork. Let's not allow small misunderstandings to tarnish the reputation of our establishment. He turned slightly, about to step back from the center of the room, when a voice rang out from the entrance. Then let's clarify what you call a small misunderstanding. The door swung open. Keanu stepped inside. He wore a charcoal gray suit, no tie, a black leather folder in one hand. He didn't need an introduction. The entire room fell silent. Victor hesitated for half a second. His face remained composed, but his eyes darkened. Keanu didn't look at anyone except Victor. He stepped to the center of the room, placed the black folder on the table, pulled out a document, and turned to the staff. I apologize for being late, but I believe that if the truth is buried today, then this place will no longer be Horizon Haven. He flipped open the first document, a contract statement from the new supplier, showing prices 1.4 times higher than the market rate. The papers bore Victor's signature. Next, he played a video clip taken from the warehouse security cameras. In it, Victor stood with the delivery team, signing off on the goods without inspecting them, then walking away immediately after. The room went completely still. No one said a word. Keanu set the documents back on the table. Then he turned and walked toward Emma. 5 years ago, my father, a frail old man, stepped onto a crowded subway at rush hour. No one gave up their seat. Only one young woman stood up and offered him hers. He turned to Victor. His gaze was piercing, not with anger, but with disappointment. Beside her sat a young man who pretended to sleep just so he wouldn't have to give up his seat. That man was Victor. The room shattered. Everything froze. No one moved. No one even breathed. Shock, confusion. Then a wave of emotions too complex to name. Some turned to look at Emma, the quiet, diligent employee they had always known, only to realize she had been the key to a story that began 5 years ago. Keanu took a slow step back, then said, kindness is not measured by salary. It's measured by what we choose to do when no one is forcing us to be kind. He paused. Victor, you are terminated for ethical misconduct, abuse of financial management, and most importantly, forgetting the simplest thing, decency. No applause, no cheers. Just a heavy silence, a quiet agreement from everyone in the room, witnessing a small but profound moment in the history of their workplace. Victor lowered his head, his face rigid. Without a word, he turned and left. The door closed behind him, a quiet but definitive end to a chapter that should never have existed. Keanu scanned the room, his expression softening. And one more thing. He turned to Emma. His voice was steady, warm, carrying the gratitude of a father no longer here. That young woman from 5 years ago is still standing here today. She has done her job with diligence, without complaint, without seeking recognition. And I believe she is the future of Horizon Haven. The room broke into quiet emotion. No shouting, no loud celebration, just glances of respect, small knowing smiles, and an unspoken acknowledgement of what Emma had done. She bowed her head, hands clasped together, eyes glistening. Not because she was recognized, but because, finally, the small act of kindness she once thought had been forgotten had become the very light that led her out of her darkest days. And that was how the past returned, not to punish, but to prove that no matter who you are, no matter where you start, a single choice can lead to something greater than you ever imagined. After that fateful meeting, Horizon Haven began a quiet yet profound transformation. The staff worked with sharper focus, the processes tightened, and the atmosphere grew lighter than it had been in years. No one spoke of it directly, but they all knew. A new chapter had begun, and at its center was Emma, the girl who once stood up for an old man, and then quietly saved an entire system from being consumed by irresponsibility. Emma continued her work as usual, if anything, even more meticulously than before. She allowed no room for carelessness, no room for distractions. She never forgot that she was still a frontline employee. And that recognition was never an excuse for complacency. What she didn't know was that in the days following that meeting, Keanu had been watching her closely. Not because he doubted her, but because he needed to be sure that her kindness wasn't just a fleeting moment, but a principle she lived by. 1 week later, Emma received a message from HR. She had been invited to the 10th floor for an internal interview. No details were given. At the bottom of the message, only one note: please wear formal business attire. That morning, she chose a crisp white blouse, dark trousers, and tied her hair neatly. When she entered the meeting room, she saw Keanu already seated at the head of the table, alongside the regional operations director and the head of HR. She gave a slight bow, trying to steady her voice. "Good morning. I'm not sure why I was called here." Keanu smiled, his expression gentle as always. "Emma, we've been discussing this for the past 3 days, and we've reached a decision. Starting today, you are officially the operations manager of Horizon Haven." She froze, her mouth opened, then closed again. Words failed her. Her mind spun. Manager? Her? The girl who once wiped tables, delivered food? The girl who failed her freshman year exam just because she chose to help an old man get home? "Emma, I don't think I'm capable enough. I've never been a manager. I'm still learning." Keanu nodded, not interrupting. When she finished, he responded slowly. "I know, but skills alone don't make a great leader. Integrity, empathy, and the ability to listen. Those are the foundation. You have all three. The rest can be learned." He placed a folder on the table, opened it, and showed her the documents: staff evaluations, customer feedback, and the latest performance charts, all showing significant improvement during the shifts Emma had been responsible for. "You don't need to be perfect. You just need to stay true to who you are. We'll train you, support you, and walk this journey with you. But the choice is yours." Emma remained silent for a long time. In her mind, she saw her mother, the frail woman who called her every night, always reminding her, "Whatever you do, keep your heart clean." She remembered the freezing, snowy nights, cycling to deliver meals, wiping away her tears in a dark, cramped apartment. She remembered Richard's eyes on that subway, his trembling hands holding the cup of tea she had made. And then she nodded, not with confidence, but slowly, as if she was saying yes to the entire journey behind her. Her first day as a manager was a mild, sunny day. The dark blue uniform, the new name tag with the word manager neatly printed beneath her name, it all felt a bit overwhelming. A few employees looked at her with unreadable expressions. Not everyone was used to seeing a former colleague become their superior, but she didn't let that stop her. She started with small changes, listening to employees' concerns, adjusting break schedules for more flexibility, proposing additional protective gear in the kitchen, and setting up a break corner with a hot water dispenser for staff to make tea during their shifts. They weren't big changes, but little by little, she made people feel valued. Once, she found a newly hired waiter crying in the locker room after being scolded by a customer. Emma didn't judge. She just sat down, handed them a tissue and said, "If you made a mistake, fix it. But tears aren't a bad thing. They're proof that you're trying." Under Emma's management, the restaurant began to move in a new way. Smoother, yet more structured. Departments worked together seamlessly, and the customer return rate increased by 8% in just 2 months. In an internal report sent to Keanu, the regional operations director wrote a short remark. Emma is doing something Victor never understood, building trust from within. That evening, Keanu visited Horizon Haven for the first time since Emma had officially become manager. He didn't book a table, just sat at the bar and ordered a mint tea. When she walked out, he looked up, smiled, and said, "I wasn't wrong to choose you." Emma didn't reply. She simply gave a small nod. But inside, she silently thanked him, and the version of herself from 5 years ago. The girl who had stood up on that freezing subway, not for a reward, but for one simple reason: to do the right thing. Time passed like an endless current. Under Emma's leadership, Horizon Haven gradually regained its reputation, achieving the highest customer satisfaction scores in the entire chain for 3 consecutive months. She didn't speak much, didn't seek recognition. She simply worked, just as she always had. But success, like a bright fire in the night, doesn't always bring comforting warmth. Sometimes it illuminates shadows that people thought had long been buried. Victor vanished after his termination. No one spoke of him again. Emma didn't think about him either, not out of hatred, but because she refused to carry the past as a burden. But those who lose power don't always know how to accept defeat, and Victor was one of them. One weekend night during peak hours, Emma received a report. A group of men was causing a disturbance in the lobby. No reservation, no check-in process, and one of them was Victor. Emma made her way to the front desk, heart steady, expression calm. She had prepared for many things, but the moment she saw his smirking face, his bitter glare, she knew. He wasn't here to talk. "Oh, Manager Emma, you've changed. Nice uniform." Doesn't really suit the girl who failed college for following some senile old man. The restaurant fell silent. Customers turned. Staff froze. A few younger employees shrank back, unsure of what was happening. Emma walked straight toward him, unwavering. "Victor, if you have something to say, take it outside. You're disrupting operations." Victor scoffed. Several men stood behind him, arms crossed, waiting for his cue. "You think you're some kind of hero? All because you gave up a seat on a train? You ruined my career, and now you act like you were never just a table-wiping nobody." Emma stayed silent, fists clenched. Victor stepped forward. One of his men edged toward a nearby table, where a couple was dining. The situation was turning dangerous. Then a voice cut through the room, calm, deep, razor sharp. "I suggest, if you have any dignity left, you walk out of here now." Everyone turned. Keanu stood at the entrance, backlit by the glow outside like a scene from a film. Victor sneered. "The CEO himself, here for a single employee?" Keanu stepped forward, voice quiet but heavy as steel. "Not because she's an employee, because she's a decent human being." He stopped just inches from Victor. "You had a chance. You had a position, but you chose to pretend to sleep when a frail old man needed help. You chose to manipulate finances for personal gain. You chose to treat people based on their worth to you. And when you were caught, instead of learning, you came back for revenge." Victor opened his mouth. Keanu raised a hand, a silent command to stop. "You think you're the victim? No, Victor. You are the result of your own choices, and this is your last one. Walk away or let security handle it." The air thickened. Victor scanned the room. The staff, once under his command, now stood tall, eyes steady. Customers held up phones recording. One of Victor's men hesitated. For the first time, Victor realized he was alone. Even his own group avoided Keanu's gaze. This man standing before him was a mirror, reflecting everything Victor had lost. Finally, he turned away. With a sharp nod, his men followed. Before leaving, he looked at Emma one last time, his eyes filled with hatred, regret, and defeat. Then he was gone, swallowed by the night. When it was over, Keanu turned to Emma. He didn't ask if she was okay. He already knew, but he said something else. "When you choose kindness, you're not just giving, it's also your shield. And today, you've proven that better than anyone I've ever met. Emma nodded, eyes glistening. Not from fear, from relief. Because finally the past had stepped aside, letting her move forward, with feet hardened by struggle, but a heart still whole. Some stories begin with moments so small, no one notices. Like a girl standing up to give her seat to an old man, while the man beside her pretended to sleep. That single moment set two lives on opposite paths. Emma had nothing but her compassion. She did the right thing, when no one asked, when no one watched. Her kindness didn't bloom instantly. It endured failure, sacrifice, and hardship. But when the time was right, it led her back into the light. Victor, on the other hand, chose comfort. He chose to look away, to manipulate, to profit. His downfall didn't start the day he was fired. It started the moment he turned his back on someone in need. Life remembers everything. It may stay silent, but when the moment comes, it will return exactly what you've given. This isn't a story about luck. It's a story about character. And if you ever have to choose between a small gain and doing what's right, remember this: kindness, no matter how small, is the one thing that will always lead you out of the darkness. Because when you choose to be kind, you will never have to live with regret.